Ready? Play.
My name is Clara Towson, and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom.
I am Francisca George, and I'm a friend of the show.
Perfect.
Hi, my name is Susan Leemans, and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom. Yeah.
My name is Zainab Sammaz, and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom.
Hey guys, my name is Sasha Vickery, and I'm a friend of the show.
Boom.
Hi, my name is Lloyd Harris, and I'm a friend of the show.
Perfect.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Paolini, and I'm a friend of the show.
Wow, Jasmine, you got it in one time.
Ready? Play.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where in the world you are tuning in from. Amy, I'm guessing it's early afternoon for you?
Yes, very hot here in the United States, sunny and hot.
Where are you in the US, Amy?
I'm about an hour from New York City.
Okay, so you're on East Coast time, so I'm guessing 2:30?
Yep,
More or
you
less.
got it.
You've been very patient with us today, Amy, as we've had a pretty dramatic day of live tennis action from SW19. Just give us your thoughts on where we're at after that day's tennis.
First of all, I was so happy to have such great matches. Like so often in these semifinals and women's finals, you can get like straight set snoozers. So I was really happy to see a lot of tension and drama. I mean, I'm just going to go to a place that people probably aren't expecting, and that's forehands.
Okay.
I've been looking really intensely at forehands the last few days, ATP style forehand versus WTA style forehand.
Okay.
And Krejcikova has a slightly more ATP look to her forehand. And it just dawned on me with all the forehand errors that I saw today in both matches, maybe that's like a less error prone way of doing it. So I want to look more into that. But I did think that Rybakina sprayed the ball, and she was the heavy favorite. So she just did not put that forehand in the court at the rate she normally does.
Yeah, that match slipped away from her quite surprisingly. We also had incredible drama in the first one, where, as I said to you just before we went live, that one person looked like they were enjoying the occasion and one person, let's say, less so. And there did feel like that one person who was enjoying the occasion was going to enjoy the last point. And that's exactly what happened. It was super close. And I'm really pleased that it's the first time we've had 2 3-setters in the women's semifinals since 2004. So 20 years without a day like this, at least on the women's side. Do you think we can get, or do you think we can have some kind of optimism about the men's tomorrow? Are we going to be able to live up to this day?
I think there's a shot that one of the two matches will live up to it. But going back to what you said about Paolini and her sort of ebullient Energizer Bunny, happy kind of attitude, it kind of reminded me of Alcaraz, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I said to you as well, like, and I said it just now, that they just like playing tennis a lot. And it comes through, and I think it helps in tough moments, because the way I was looking at Paolini, much like Carlos on many occasions in the last couple of years, you wouldn't think that they were in their first ever Wimbledon semi-final. And yeah, she carried the occasion. I like that comparison with Carlos as well, because yeah, of course, sometimes he's a bit down, but generally he's winning matches, and generally he's got a smile on his face.
Absolutely. I saw a TikTok video the other day. I mean, this is how I get my information now, I guess.
Amy,
But
TikTok,
I
look
know
at you.
it was like a study. It was a scientific study about players who, after they lose a point, have the thought in their head that I'm still enjoying this. They win more. So that dovetails right into what you were just saying about Paulini.
Yeah, right. By the way, there's an interesting tweet I found from Carlos from a year ago of how it started and how it's going. I'm just going to share it on the screen with you right now. We'll get into the Carlos Medvedev details in a minute, but I've just put Carlos Alcaraz in my search, and this is one of the first things that come up. It was obviously just after he won Wimbledon, and it looks like the kid on the left, by the way, is having a lot of fun, but the kid on the right is also having a lot of fun too. Will he be having a lot of fun tomorrow? Well, let's have a quick look at their paths to the final because it's not been easy for either player. Let's start with Carlos. Of course, he had that match with Tiafoe en route when I think he was down 2-1. But we know his record in 5 sets, and that helps at Grand Slams.
Yes, that was an incredible match, and like you said, it's just like he doesn't mind if he's running ahead in the match or if he's winning. It doesn't matter if he's playing from behind. He really enjoys being there. He likes the challenge. His variety really gives him an advantage over other players because if one thing isn't working, he can always go to something else.
What did you think about that Tiafoe match? Because there was sort of 2 narratives that I was building in my head. One was that Alcaraz is through. He's got away with it, perhaps. His level wasn't quite there. Francis was probably playing his best tennis in about a year. So much could be taken from that. But then afterwards, there was also this kind of, this level, is it going to be enough to win Wimbledon? Is it going to be enough to get to another final? Is he going to have to go through Yannick again? Well, of course, that roadblock at least has been removed. But he has got another one in the form of Medvedev. What have you made in general of Alcaraz's level in this tournament?
Good, maybe not necessarily his tippy top, but all the greats can win with their A level, their B level, and their C level. I mean, one thing that's interesting about Tiafoe, he's an incredible athlete. He's one of my favorite players on tour, friendly guy, but he was kind of self-taught. So his forehand is a bit unconventional. And in the super, super tight moments, I think those types of unconventional strokes might be a little bit more prone to breaking down because stroke technique is a science and this stuff has been figured out. And yeah, there is a little bit of variation, but Alcaraz is about as close to classic as you can get and the latest technology and the racket lag and all that. So when it's all on the line and you're in a 5th set, I think what he's been trained to do since he was very young is the thing that's probably going to give him the advantage.
How impressed are you with his 5-set record, especially when you bear in mind his age? I think it's either 11-1 or 12-1, but he's only lost 1 5-setter, arguably the biggest one. I mean, depends on how you view each slam, but I mean, that one over Novak, obviously a year ago. How much of an advantage does that give him at every Grand Slam? And also his age. Something like that you kind of think of with a Novak maybe, or someone a bit older in their career, but he's already establishing this legacy, if you like, at his tender age.
Yeah, I mean, you cannot teach clutch. You can't teach confidence. You can't teach things like when does he use the drop shot the most when he's break point down or whatever it is, the really meaningful points. That's been statistically shown that that's when the guy has the guts to go for that kind of a shot. You can't teach that. And I think that his youth actually at this point in his career plays to his advantage because he's so young. He's only 21. He doesn't quite understand yet everything that's on the line here. And as time goes by, your life becomes more fraught. And he's just not there yet. Whereas Djokovic has already kind of seen the ebbs and flows, understood what it all means, and then risen to the occasion anyway.
wasn't very long ago, Amy, that maybe not you and I, but certain people anyway, were panicking about Carlos's level. Hadn't won a tournament from Wimbledon until Indian Wells. I mean, most people would dream of winning a title every 9 months, especially when it comes to the magnitude of those two tournaments. But what were your thoughts during that sort of barren spell, if you like, for Carlos?
Being completely honest with you, not trying to brag about myself or anything like that. I was not the least bit worried. And you can go back to
No.
some of my podcasts. I thought it was ridiculous, the
Hmm.
criticism. And one of my most popular tweets this year was when I did back-to-back headlines within 10 days of each other. One of them from the same media outlet, reputable media outlet. One of
Hmm.
them said, "What's wrong with Carlos Alcaraz?" And the other one said,
Mm.
"Carlos Alcaraz is making his magic again." Within 10 days.
Okay,
It's
yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
come on.
But that's the
Do we
media,
have to be so knee-jerk? The fans are that way as well.
Yeah.
It's not just the media.
That's true. Yeah, that's been put to bed, I think, for a while at least. Of course, he's going to have an opponent on the other side of the net in the form of Daniel Medvedev. We can bring up the head-to-head right now, which is favorable for Carlos, but it was only a year ago when we thought that maybe this head-to-head would actually get quite painful for Daniel, because the combination of these two players playing, especially at Wimbledon, with Carlos's touch at the net, Daniel Medvedev's super deep return position, we saw what was a pretty uncomfortable evening for Daniel at this exact stage a year ago. So many times serving and volleying against him. Djokovic did exactly the same in the US Open final. Is it a tactic you think Carlos will lean on again tomorrow?
It's interesting that you raised that point. I read a quote from Alcaraz. It's like, I'm hoping that things will go exactly as they did last year. However, as I'm sure you're about to raise, Daniil then went on to beat Alcaraz in the US
Mm-hmm.
Open.
Mm-hmm.
Much different result, different kind of
Mm-hmm.
match. So, the thing that I wrote in my preview going into this tournament, because I had a spy kind of, not really, but I had a spy camped out at Wimbledon watching Daniil practice.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that he's really messing around with his return position more
Mm-hmm.
than he's ever seen him do that before.
Mm-hmm.
And he's practicing volleys more than I've seen him do before. He's
Mm-hmm.
coming in practice.
Mm-hmm.
That has borne out over the course of this tournament. I bet if I looked at the stats, I would see more net play from Medvedev, and certainly he's moved in, and sometimes he moves back, but he's moving in more on his return position. So I think if Carlos thinks it's going to be the same guy that he played a year ago, he might be mistaken. So he better prep for what Medvedev's been doing in this tournament in 2024.
I noticed Daniel a little bit, even on some of the hard courts earlier in the year, was coming to the net a little bit more often, having a little bit of an improvement in that area of his game, which I think is important if you want to be successful, especially on other surfaces. And I can remember thinking back to that 2022 Australian Open final against Nadal, and how often he was caught in no man's land, that horrible part of the court between the service line and the baseline. You just got to get out of that as soon as possible, either get to the baseline or come to the net. And Daniil would always try and get to the baseline as soon as possible. And I thought to myself, it's a pity that he just couldn't just come into the net a little bit from that area of the court. And he does do it a little bit more often, and he does do it with a bit more success. The other thing you highlighted regarding the return position is he does play around with it a bit. We all remember that Jim Courier interview. How fantastic was that in Australia? And he is something, he's just adding a bit of variety. We saw it against Yannick in the previous round. They showed some stats on his movement in terms of that position. And yeah, I mean, he emerges. He's turned, or at least he's stunted the Yannick run of 5 wins in a row against him, albeit there were a few asterisks in that match regarding Yannick's health and fitness. What did you make of Daniil at Wimbledon so far, but in particular that quarterfinal win over Sinner?
Solid, very solid. And I'm sure he could see that Sinner was compromised, and yet he just kept his head down and powered through anyway. Um, it's a bit of a confidence bait and switch. I mean, you've beat the number one player in the world, and that feels great, but in the back of your mind, you know that he wasn't 100%. So where is Medvedev's confidence going into this match against Alcaraz? That's the big question.
Yes, indeed it is. But he's had a few bumps, as I say, look, obviously 5 sets there. Nothing quite like in Australia where he was just having 5 sets after 5 sets after 5 sets. So I don't think we're going to have too many concerns about his health at this stage of the tournament. What about thoughts on the match, predictions? Where are you thinking for that?
I'm such a bad predictor and I don't like to do it, but I will do it for you.
Thank you.
I'm going to go with Carlos in 5
Okay.
because I just like his hands. I just like his quickness, his speed, and when all else is in doubt, I like the guy who comes into the net at Wimbledon.
Yeah, me too. I also probably would go a little bit more comfortable for Carlos. I see the likelihood of a repeat of the Wimbledon semi-final more likely from last year than the US Open one, where Daniel did really well to turn that. Again, there was feelings a year ago. Can Medvedev ever beat Carlos again? Again, knee-jerk reaction perhaps, but we saw how the Indian Wells final of 2023 had panned out as well. Quite similar. Very different conditions, but the serve volley technique was very successful there for Carlos too. And it felt those two matches back to back were such dominant performances that it was difficult to imagine what would happen in New York. And I'm not saying it'll be quite so comfortable, but probably I would go Carlos in 4.
Everybody has outlier matches. They're human beings, for whatever reason. Maybe they just weren't feeling certain strokes that night or
Sure.
they weren't 100%. Stuff happens off court. We don't tend to think of that, but it does. And I just think that Medvedev is he's a less dimensional player. Like many times I've seen Carlitos playing a match and the serve and volley's not working for him. Okay, so I'm going to grind from the baseline for a while and I'm going to beat you that way. Or grinding from the baseline isn't working. I'm going to break things up by hitting a drop shot. He's got so many tools in the bag where Medvedev doesn't. If his serve is off or forehand is off, what does he go to?
Serving.
That's where I lean. I'm sure Alcaraz is the favorite in the match.
Sure. Certainly Medvedev has had 1 or 2 service issues as well over the last year or so, a few double faults more than he would expect. But I think he's even talked about how I think he picked up a shoulder injury at some point and that sort of compromised him a little bit. But yeah, for me, it's a Carlos win. Okay, let's go over to the other men's semi-final between Djokovic and Musetti. Let's start with the Italian. How surprised are you that he's in the Wimbledon semi-finals?
I would be totally surprised, except for the fact that on my own podcast with Gil Gross, Gil was touting Musetti going into the tournament, folks. Got to give this guy his
Okay.
props. He didn't end up picking him, but he was like, that was his number one kind of dark horse to make the Final Four, I think. So he really got me thinking about it. And then as Musetti started to play better as the tournament went on, I'm like, this guy's game is really suited to this surface, especially because of his slice. So, not totally shocked because I had a tipster talking about it right before the tournament.
I mean, he did make the final of Queens, but it's probably the way I framed the question probably tells you that I am surprised to see him in the semis. I thought Fritz would beat him, but that didn't pan out. One doubt I have about Fritz, which I think, and I hope I'm not misquoting him, but Gil has highlighted a couple of years ago, Taylor in sort of type 5 setters is not necessarily someone that you would bank or back to do so. But yeah, I mean, Musetti, by the way, we've got two Amy Lundis on our screen right now. I'm sharing a screenshot from
Hi.
But I mean, Musetti did make the Queen's final, and that could easily have gone to 3 sets. Tommy Paul winning it in 2, but the second set was a deciding set. Oh, sorry, it was a 10-8 tiebreak scenario. So it was obviously very close. But I guess I'm also surprised because of this cliche and this stereotype. I'm thinking of Musetti. I'm thinking of Clay. I'm thinking of him pushing Novak to 5 sets at the French Open. I'm thinking of him beating him on the clay in Monte Carlo last year. it's not necessarily a surface that I immediately associate Lorenzo with, and yet here we are.
So much is made of surface, and it does make a difference, especially at the top levels of the sport where the margins are so razor thin. Surface can mean everything. And yet, John, and yet there are certain players who play well on all the surfaces, or they play well on grass, they play well on clay. Um, for differing reasons. Like, I think of players like Madison Keys, who has a huge backswing on her forehand, and she had a pretty good clay season this year. And she was saying, "I'm just happy to have the extra time that clay affords you." You don't typically think of Madison Keys as being a good clay court player, but there's myriad different reasons that a certain surface can suit a certain player. And of course, like Tsitsipas is not a good grass court player. That's pretty much well established now.
Mm.
So yeah, now, Musetti is emerging as someone who, hey, he likes the grass.
He's certainly taken the scenic route, Amy, to the final with 4 sets against Lestien, 5 sets against Darderi. Comisania as well was 4 sets Pericard as well, before emerging the winner in 5 over Fritz. I think he's young, fit, and I don't really associate him with somebody that maybe has physical issues in the way that still I think Sinner hasn't quite dispelled that notion in a way. But for Musetti, it doesn't seem to be a big issue. But he has spent significantly more time on court than Novak. Of course, Novak having a walkover in the previous round. Is a walkover a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, it puts you through to the next round, but some people talk about the rhythm that can be lost from that.
For Novak, it's never a bad thing because up until they made some changes a few years ago, I want to say it was pre-pandemic, so maybe it was like 5, 6 years ago, the
Hmm.
tours made some changes because the players were showing up and grabbing their prize money and retiring in their first round match. And it was a real problem and a disappointment and a money problem for the Grand Slams. So they changed the rules, and now it's fairly complicated, but it basically de-incentivizes you showing up for a match and retiring, midway through the match. So just prior to that, um, Novak was the beneficiary of many, many walkovers, especially in Grand Slams. I mean, you
Hmm.
could say people just didn't want to face him. They got through their whatever match, and then but statistically, there was in the middle ages of Novak's career, he was getting a lot of walkovers, and it didn't seem to bother him at all, did it? Because he
No.
just kept ragging up slams. So for Novak, I think a walkover is never a bad thing, especially given the knee surgery.
Right, that's probably the other thing, isn't it? Novak has dropped a couple of sets en route. I think probably in terms of we looked at Novak's draw, and 2 narratives could have been built and probably were built, and perhaps even by me, was that the first week was going to be not too bad. Second week was going to get much tougher. But Rune, in the end, it was a fairly easy assignment. The quarterfinal against Hurkacz didn't happen because Hurkacz obviously, goes out or was injured or whatever. And then Dimonor takes over that role, but of course he gets hurt as well. So in the end, it's been a pretty serene passage for Novak to the semi-final. Do you think it'll be serene once more again tomorrow?
I think there's a few matches that Novak and Musetti have played where Musetti kept it pretty close early on, and I think you mentioned Roland Garros,
Yeah.
and then Novak just steamrolled in the closing sets.
Mhm.
And it was that one, it might have been the first time they played at Roland Garros when Musetti might have even still been a teenager,
Yeah.
where, Novak just did not look back. So if that's the case, don't if you're a Novak fan, I wouldn't get nervous if Novak drops a set, either the first set or the second set, because Novak's going to do Novak. But I do think that Novak will win,
Yeah.
especially if he's healthy. And It's just, Musetti sort of has this look of just can't believe I made it this far at this point.
Yeah, right. What have you made of Novak's year? I mean, it's been a rocky year by his standards. I think this is his first. I don't think he's made a final all year. He made a semi-final in Monte Carlo, which, of course, for him, by the way, these are nuts statistics in that, normally he's picked up 2 slams sometimes by now, but he's certainly picked up a couple of titles. I mean, again, a bit like the Carlos situation, slightly different because of their ages. Have you watched Novak this year and seen anything that does suggest a decline is about to happen? Or again, are people pressing the panic button too early?
I might have been pressing the panic button a little bit going into this tournament, but everything that I've seen, he's been his usual dominant self. It's, we talk a lot about motivation with Djokovic. Motivation versus skill diminishment. And early part of this year, he might have been lacking motivation. He's certainly admitted to that kind of thing before.
Yeah.
But in the French Open, he was trying very hard to win matches, and he did win matches even on a bum knee. And when you really start to appreciate something when the threat of that it might be taken away from you. And I think that when he hurt his knee and they said you might not be able to play Wimbledon, and he was like, wait a minute, I'm gonna do everything I can. And I think he seems motivated. So a
Yeah.
motivated Djokovic is, a very powerful, strong Djokovic.
Yeah, he did touch upon it himself, perhaps around that Indian Wells period, that it's like, yeah, maybe he took his eye off the ball a little bit, or that he is struggling. But he did say, look, slam times, it's like we go into slam mode. I think I've even heard Rafa use that expression before about going into slam mode. And it did feel as though he was actually looking pretty good at Roland Garros. I will still never know. Of course, he would have gone on to win the title, but that knee injury scuppered him there. But in a way, this knee injury as well is sort of redoubled his focus, if possible, and redoubled his determination to A, get back on the court, and B, win another Grand Slam. He said just on the eve of the tournament, I'm not here to win a couple of rounds. I'm here to go and try and win this tournament and try and win it. He is. Are we thinking of a repeat, therefore, of last year's final of Alcaraz and Djokovic?
I think so. I mean, I wouldn't have necessarily thought that Sinner would lose. So anything can happen. But yeah, I think that's what you're looking at.
Yeah.
It'll just be really interesting to see because Musetti has the one-handed backhand,
Mm-hmm.
and Novak has all the data guys, looking to see where does this guy make errors, so it'll be interesting to see where he serves. Does he serve to the guy's backhand predominantly, or does he not like what comes back, which might be slicey or chippy? And where does he predominantly rally with Musetti, to his forehand or his backhand? That'll just be interesting.
I think it would be quite difficult to imagine Musetti having a good return day, especially on that backhand side with a one-hander, if Novak serves as well as he did against Rune. I think that Rune could have done better in that match. I think some of his decision-making was questionable at times. But also there was the fact that Novak had one of those serving days, which I saw him produce quite a bit in the back end of last year, especially in Paris, but especially even more so perhaps in Turin last year, where even Yannick, was struggling with Novak's serve in the ATP final. And so I think, therefore, yeah, I can see Musetti getting a set, but yes, I think we'll see a repeat of last year's final between Alcaraz and Djokovic.
And won't that be entertaining?
Fingers
Because
crossed.
last year's match was a
Well,
humdinger.
no.
That was.
I've spoken to lots of people about those two Alcaraz Djokovic matches from last year in Cincinnati and at Wimbledon. Do you have a preference for those two in terms of, like, we do an end of year show looking at some of the matches of the year, and actually most of the people I spoke to were pretty divided on which one they would have chosen between Cincinnati and Wimbledon.
I liked the Wimbledon final because it was a bit unexpected. People had built up in their minds that Alcaraz is his best surface is clay. And, of course, he lost at Roland Garros that year.
Hmm.
And coming into Wimbledon, very few people were picking him to win. And he just, to that point, he didn't have a lot of matches on grass. I mean, as a professional. So, knowing the overwhelming history that Djokovic has on grass and at Wimbledon specifically, it was a real surprise. And it was close. It came down to the end. So that would be my preference. What about you?
Yeah, I would go for the Wimbledon one for a couple. In fact, I did go for the Wimbledon one. I put it at number one on our list, and the reason is this is two reasons. One, it's Wimbledon, so if it's neck and neck, or you're not sure, you've got. I think both were incredibly high level, both were dramatic. I think also the result does change. If Novak wins, it's not quite probably on that next level. It's the fact that Carlos wins. It's almost like when you get an absolute unbelievable match, but the underdog ends up winning it. It does elevate it in our memories, if you like, and I think that plays a role. But Wimbledon 5 sets, the fact that the quality was unbelievably high, the fact that it had a lot of twists and turns, and yet Cincinnati for a set and a half, the commentary team, and I can't remember who it was who was doing that match, but they basically said at a set and a half, well, this has been a non-event. This hasn't lived up to expectations. And that's how it was. Now, that's not to say that it didn't take off in an unbelievable fashion thereafter and absolutely deserves to be in the top 2 for the year of 2023. But for the reasons I've just laid out, I do have to just put Wimbledon just above it.
Plus, that's tennis. Just when you think, I mean, I said to somebody when I saw the first set of this women's match, Krejcikova and Rybakina, I thought it was going to be a beatdown
Oh,
by
yeah.
Rybakina. And just like that, it can turn on a dime. It can turn on a dime after somebody has match points. Or set points. So, yeah, that's the beauty of this sport and why it's unlike any other.
In my post-match tweet of Rybakina Krejcikova, that's exactly what I said, and I finished it with "That's tennis," because after 4 or 5 games, it was like, oh dear, this is kind of going the way we feared it might and thought it might and is going. But that first set obviously ends 6-3, but Barbora just hung in there and hung in there. She did. Somebody who did call Alcaraz winning last year's title, I agree. It was a bit of a not left field, because I think he was world number 2 going into the tournament, but still because of what had happened before. But he even laid out the what happened at the French Open as part of his reasoning. And we're going to play us out at the end of this show with his words from a year or just over a year ago. And that was Michael Stich. He said, Alcaraz is winning Wimbledon, and this is why. I've got a 90-second clip, and I'm going to play us out with that clip in a second. But I just want to say a big thank you for joining us today, Amy.
Happy to be here. Always great to talk tennis with you.
Yep, we dip in every sort of 6 months into your thoughts, and I remember us catching up around about this time of the Australian Open, and I'm fingers crossed we can catch up with you again later on in the year.
I'd love to. Thanks.
Thanks, Amy. And as promised, I'm going to play you out with Michael Stich's thoughts, as I say, going into Wimbledon last year. And prophetic, I think, is the words that I'm looking for. I need to find the video. I've got it here somewhere. Very professional of me. Yeah, here we go. Mystic Michael is how I've titled the video. So here we go. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks.
His game when the big occasions come up. So he has to be one of the top favorites. I truly believe we had a podcast ourselves yesterday, which I do with Patrick Kühnen, called Mad Dog and Wingman. And we spoke about that obviously as well, the outlook. And I picked Carlos Alcaraz as the winner this year, just because he won just his first title on grass. I think he is extremely, in a way, extremely able to adapt to situations and to challenges, not just because he has the game, just because he's loving it. He loves it to challenge himself. And I think he has learned a lot of players. When you look back at the French Open semifinals against Novak, his breakdown, his physical and mental breakdown, with a lot of players, you would say they would struggle with that for the next weeks and months to come. I think with Alcaraz, he has learned a huge lesson from that match, and it will never happen again to him. I think it made him even stronger and a better player. And that's why I really feel like he believes he can Wimbledon, and he wants to prove to the world that that was a one-off and it's not going to happen again. And I think if you would look at it and he would be honest, maybe he would say, like, I want to play the final against Novak and I want to prove to the people that's not going to happen again and I'm able to win this. So my pick really is Carlos Alcaraz.
I know we can. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on all things